Welcome back, everybody. Time for another lesson, and we're in for a special treat, literally.
Sweet treat.
A sweet treat today, as Professor Adam is going to be taking the reins and allow me to come sit with y'all and learn about the empire that is Hershey's. And we did Mercedes-Benz a little bit ago, and that turned into the invention of the modern automobile. I feel like when you pitch me on this, when you first just hear it, like immediately you're just like, okay, how much depth is there to that? And then you think about it, you're like, okay, shit, based on what we've done before, knowing how long this company has been around and knowing how these companies that first started actually grow and kind of the shit that goes on behind the scenes, you provided faith in me that you were going to do this one justice.
Milton Hershey is, I've done a little bit of research. Shocker, for my teaching episode, you're either getting probably food, sports, or wrestling.
And that's why I like it, because for mine, you're going to get war, something more adjacent, or leading into a war, something like that, yeah.
Well, we'll get some, I'm sure there'll be some more Star Wars things and some other...
Oh, yeah, fictional shit.
Yeah, it's there. But when you look at these major companies and you look at where the genesis for some of these things had to start, the world of business capitalism is fascinating. Mm-hmm. That's probably the best way to put it. Capitalism breeds all sorts of competition. Competition then breeds all sorts of more competition. Mm-hmm. And you see backstabbings and all this kind of stuff. But in America, we're always taught the American dream is finding your passion, putting everything you want into it, and turning it into an empire to where you can die fat, rich, and happy. And Milton Hershey is really no different from that story. He's kind of the unfortunate parts of capitalism, but also a guy that just could never give up.
That man over there that just put that in such eloquent terms, that is Professor Adam. He is today especially, he's the Willy Wonka to my Charlie Bucket. He's the Augustus Gloop to my Chocolate River. And he is the weird singing candy shop guy to the scores of children that are apparently unattended by their parents. That's Professor Adam.
I love it. I started this whole thing, just full disclosure, started this whole thing, got into some of the heavier research, and was like, this is awesome. All I have to do is just suck this guy off for an hour and a half. He is so cool. He is the American version of Willy Wonka. And there were so many different things where I was like, this is fucking cool. How did he make this happen? Mm-hmm. And then once we started getting into Rich Milton Hershey, I was like, oh no, this is where it all turns. This is what happens when capitalism really eats into...
This is the King John.
Yeah, exactly. So there's going to be a lot of good stuff. There's going to be a lot of fun little weird tie-ins to a lot of different shit that I just really didn't see coming in this whole entire thing. But then at the same time, we're going to have to get real and kind of talk about why this guy is and was human and kind of how he did some of the things that he did.
That's the best part of these episodes, is because you find out, the product. We're sitting here with the Hershey's bar in front of us.
Yep.
They don't even have to dress these things up. It looks like this is probably the same logo that they've used. Well, even on it says since 1894. And Hershey's is one of those things that if someone's like, hey, grab me a Hershey's, that could just mean chocolate. It's synonymous with like, hey, grab me a Kleenex. There's so many different brands, but it's such a huge company. And not only that, but we think of, Hershey's as maybe being just strictly an American thing, kind of like we used to think of McDonald's. Mm-hmm. But then you look at it in the scope of the world, and it's just as big everywhere else. But you also know that in order to get that big, for 99% of the time, companies that get this big don't do so by strictly benevolent or morally altruistic means.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So before we get into the episode, just remember, rate, review, subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. Follow us on social media because you're going to be getting clues and everything about what episodes are going to be coming out. The comments have been fantastic, guys, both the good and the bad. The bad ones motivate us. The good ones motivate us even more. And keep at it. You guys are doing great, and we'll keep doing this for you.
Let's take a paddle down a chocolate river.
Tell me about Milt.
Milton Snavely Hershey.
Fuck yes.
Snavely, being his mother's maiden name, was born September 13th, 1857, in a place called Derry Township, Pennsylvania, to Henry, and I love these old-timey times because we always get fun names, Fanny.
Fanny's like a Gertrude.
Not a lot of Fannies left in the world, I'm sure. They were born into a Mennonite community. These people were Mennonites. Mennonites, Amishy kind of a deal. There's a lot of there's Mennonites everywhere. There's Mennonites on the West Coast. I don't think there's as many Amish. I don't know the distinction. I'd love to know. But regardless, Milton grew up speaking Pennsylvania Dutch, which is kind of interesting to think that that's the starting point for a chocolate empire, was being a Mennonite and just kind of hanging out and farming.
Were the Netherlands, are they famous for chocolate? Because I know you always talk about Belgian chocolate, right, and everything. Were the Netherlands famous for anything like that? Was that kind of a thing that came out of the Netherlands?
Dairy.
Okay.
Dairy was the huge kind of factor.
The key component, one of the key components in it, yeah.
Yeah, it comes into play big. His younger sister, Serena, was born 1862, so he was 5 years old. Or she was, she died at 4, so he becomes an only child again. He only received a 4th grade education. His father, Henry, was a pretty interesting dude as far as he was a dreamer. He didn't really have any problems in the Mennonite community finding, oh, did you hear about the gold in Denver? Or did you hear about the silver rush in Denver? Well, I got to go chase that dream. I'm going to go see what I can do over there. He would take off on the family a lot. His ideas never really panned out. So when you have a father that's not making a ton of money, you have a mother that's taking care of Milton and just kind of trying to get the family by. Luckily, you end up having family in these Mennonite communities where they were able to move back to Derry. More specifically, why can't I think of what the name is? It's interesting. The fight against Lancaster.
Okay.
So Lancaster is, I think, Lancaster, don't really know how to say it, but it was a fairly big Mennonite community. I think it's a fairly big Amish community, maybe still Mennonite, but they were able to go back, work on the land of their family, and kind of have a little bit of subsistence. Henry, knowing that the family needed money, went ahead and signed Milton up for an apprenticeship with a printer at the age of 14.
He's like, enough of these wild dreams, Milt.
Yeah.
Gold, silver, the Wild West.
You're 14. I need you here making money so I can go chase my dreams.
Yeah.
That's how we're going to do this.
Stop playing make-believe.
But Milton hated it. He was signed up for this contract that was like 7 years or something like that. So it was going to put him into his 20s.
Is that
it was
a
going
child labor
Yeah,
contract?
yeah,
basically.
for sure. It was child labor agreed upon in a contract. So how do you fix that situation? How do you get fired from the printer? Old Milt pulled, I'm sure, his pork pie hat off of his head, and he threw it down into the printing press, completely broke the machine, and they fired him.
He's sitting there being like, am I going to have to put a body part in here? Or do you think just part of my outfit will suffice?
I like all these fingers, and I got plans for them later.
You see him if he's like trying to size up getting a foot up there. He's like, I'm just going to try my hat first and see if this works.
Yeah, if the hat doesn't work, then we can find a different measure. Maybe a shoe next. But when Fanny decided that it was her turn to try to figure out something for their son to do, she arranged an apprenticeship with a confectioner named Joseph Royer in Lancaster at the age of 14 after this whole debacle didn't really work out at the print shop. And he was mostly working ice cream. His mother kind of greased the palms of Royer a little bit to have him work more towards the confectionery side. Because if you're going to learn a skill, ice cream is great, but ice cream has to have a certain amount of things to create it, and you have to hold it at a certain temperature.
You can bake anywhere.
Yeah, you can make chocolate anywhere, and chocolate's like a far off dream at this point. When I was thinking about all this, I don't know how it ever really came across, but what do you think came first, chocolate or caramel?
You're going to have to break down for me, because I know technically
Caramel.
chocolate, you need the cocoa.
Yep.
Do you say caramel or caramel?
It kind of depends.
Does it depend what it is?
No, it's
Like in what way it's used?
Caramel feels
I know
like
it's caramel.
caramel.
I just say caramel.
Yeah.
What's the key ingredient in caramel?
Milk and sugar.
Caramel came first.
Yep. Yeah, because again, if
It's
you're
readily available there, like sugarcane and everything, and especially because even in areas like down in the Caribbean where they were growing a lot of sugarcane, you would be able to process sugar, and you had milk from not necessarily didn't have to be cows, but goat's milk, all that kind of stuff. So there was probably an earlier combination of that.
yeah, and I for some reason I thought that chocolate was first, but the way you described it was the exact same way that I came to that. Was just you have to get cocoa from somewhere, and that's not going to be readily available. Where you're always going to have probably some source
Well,
of
hold
sugar
on.
and dairy.
We've talked about like with the Aztecs and the Incas, didn't they have some type of like rudimentary form of like cacao or chocolate that they would somehow make into a drink?
Yeah,
Okay. So is that's before this, but are you talking about the discovery of like actual like chocolate as a manufactured like food or dessert?
something sold in stores.
Caramel. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I got you.
So he learns the confection business. He ends up deciding after being there for 4 years, got to move to Philly, got to start this whole process. I've got 4 years under my belt. I'm 18 years old. I got to move away
I'm a
from my
fucking
mom.
man. Yeah, I got to open my own shop at 18.
1876, he ends up moving to Philly. He has this aunt in his life. Her name's Aunt Maddie, and nobody's ever believed in anybody as much as Aunt Maddie believed in Milt. She was always there for him. She supported him through all of his ventures. Not a big fan of his dad, obviously, for obvious reasons, because this guy just keeps bailing on his family to try to go make money and then comes back poorer than he was before.
Is Aunt Maddie end up being the strong female presence that helps him in this story? Or does he have a wife too that does that?
He's got a lot of very strong ladies around him. Between Maddie, we'll talk about his wife. His mom follows him kind of everywhere he goes to. But when they show up in Philly, Aunt Maddie goes, I'll give you the money to start. We're going to put you right here in this location. I'm going to choose this location for you in 1876. We'll see what goes on from there.
Is Aunt Maddie like a fucking like neighborhood boss? I see Aunt Maddie as like that being her like you need to go see Aunt Maddie if you have a problem.
Well, the interesting thing about it for me about Aunt Maddie is these people are Mennonites.
Yeah.
I don't understand what it is. I've said that multiple times. But Aunt Maddie always kind of had money and she had extra houses. So I don't know if Mennonites believe in getting rich, but
I think Aunt Maddie's probably the black sheep that's doing real well.
well, her husband helps with some of the loan aspects coming up. But this couldn't have been a bigger win for Milton because his shop goes in 1876 in Philadelphia. What else is going on in 1876 in Philadelphia? The Centennial World's Fair.
Okay.
So his shop is located 1 block away from the main drag of the World's Fair.
Oh, yeah.
And his company just flourishes. They're making all sorts of caramels that are being bought up by these people that are from all around the world and does really, really well. The Centennial Exposition just kind of blows the doors off for him. So much so that his business really didn't start to see a hit until their 6th year. And he's starting to have some money issues. Somebody pops up in his life again as his father sends him a letter saying, Milton, I got some ideas.
So instead of the normal just starting a business, struggling 2 to 3 years to break even and then start making a profit when you do that, he essentially opened the business. Everyone went hog nuts for it, which was probably due to the fact that a lot of the people with his business were people coming in for the World's Fair. It was so close. As soon as that started dying off and it became less of a novelty, then he hit those, usually what are first year growing pains, he started coming back down.
Yeah, and luckily he had a pretty nice pillow built up for him because all the money he made initially.
But it's not going in the right direction at this point. Yeah.
No. So he believes in his father. He loves his father. There's always something to be said for a father and son relationship. There's always going to be love there, regardless of how it all happens, unless it goes really, really south. His father's main idea was display cases, and these actually didn't sound too bad to me, but kind of the modern glass display case where you have the open glass or the closed glass front that you can see everything through, and then you have the sliding doors behind it so you can reach in and pull stuff out. I mean, that seems like the best display case that you can have. Like, instead of having glass panes in the front that you open up to get, like if you're grabbing donuts or bagels or something like that at the store, you can control everything. You can market your product.
There's not a place that doesn't have those. Like, I mean, there is, but if you think about any type of like bakery you go into, it keeps everything fresh when it's still in there because it seals it and it keeps everything sanitary. It's one of those weird things that you don't think about, but if you were the first one to get in on that, you'd be like, oh shit, like It's like the zipper guy. Everything uses a zipper, but
Yeah.
no one can describe who the guy is.
Well, and there's also kind of this weird thought too of like at one time glass wasn't that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Like glass was very, very hard to come by, so you wouldn't take the risk of making like a full glass display.
Do you ever watch the glass making videos
All the
that you
time.
come across? To know that that's how glass used to have to be made individually is an insane concept to me, like how anything ever got mass produced and what mass production had to even mean at that point. Like we made 10 glass bulbs today. It's like, oh, damn, that's a lot.
I love watching glass blowing. It's so cool to me just how it all goes, and it probably goes along with most of the things that I enjoy come out of smoking in glass. But at the same time, it's just such an interesting thing to think that back then there were just like cupboards that you would store bread in, and they'd be like, "Can I see a loaf of sourdough?" And you just reach back and pull out a loaf of sourdough and show them.
Yeah.
Like instead of having a full display case. So these kind of made sense to me. His other deal was he had developed this idea for cough drops. Philadelphia, the wintertime, kind of makes sense. Cough drops were not necessarily like a brand new thing, but they were still fairly new. They did okay.
What do they call it? Cough drop. Like what's the
Lozenge.
That's what lozenge. Throat lozenge.
I assume that they're probably fairly easy and idiot proof to make because you know the things that coat your throat as far as honey or any sort of different sugars.
As a kid, I had an addiction to the Luden's wild cherry ones.
Yeah.
They were fucking candy. Those were not cough drops. And so I'd go into this, I need, they came in a little paper
That's
box.
how they had to make them taste.
Yeah.
Just to get them down. But the cough drops worked okay. It didn't really sustain them, though, because cough drops are a seasonal thing. The display cases, for some reason, really never took off. Aunt Maddie and his mother had followed him to Philadelphia. They were wrapping these caramels individually by hand. They just always wanted to work with him to see what happens. But unfortunately, by the time 1882 rolls around, the business just closes. He doesn't have enough money. He has all of his machinery that he packs up, sends back to Lancaster with his aunt and mom. And his dad had taken off at that point. His dad had actually asked him to buy him out of the business so his father could go on to another
venture or something like that.
something else that he could do.
So just for clarification, at this point, there's nothing related to really chocolate at this point.
No.
He's simply just making things as a confectioner, like cupcakes, cakes, things like that, like caramels, like you said, maybe some type of like other type of candy where you just reduce down sugar and put how they make like old timey candy now, where they pull it and all that shit.
You got maple candies,
But
that kind of thing.
it's not like this is his first foray into like this is my product and it just fails. Like he hasn't hit that genius idea yet.
No, and as far as his business acumen goes, part of the reason that his first company failed was he was creating these things in bulk and then he was wholesaling them to other businesses. And when you do that, if you do it on credit and you take in credit for it and then those people have to pay you back, all of the materials that you're getting to make those candies, there's no like, hey, I'll get you back on this one. They're going to want their money immediately. If you're wholesaling to another store that hasn't sold through their stock, they're not going to pay you till they have to. So you're not getting the money from the product that you're making to pay the people that you're using their product to make it.
This is kind of a common theme throughout really any individual of like note or prominence that we've discussed on this, regardless of what they're doing, regardless if they're starting a business. There hasn't been one person that did not fail in their first attempt.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about a person who's just like, no, they just struck gold the first time that they tried it. So had you told me that it just worked out from the get-go, I would have been like waiting for the shoe to drop. So it's good that this is kind of following the same trajectory of every other highly successful person we've talked about, whether they be crazy or not.
I'd be very interested to see who could get it right the first time. There has to be somebody out there, but they're going to be few and far between. So after the business closes in 1882, he ends up following his father to Denver on a letter that he had written from Denver to Milton to say, hey, there's a silver rush out here. You need to come out here and try to make a life in the New West for you. And things went really poorly as he first got there because he was almost kidnapped. They had these like labor companies that you would go to find work. And some of the labor companies that you would go to find work for children would then kidnap you, take you to farms, pay you little to no money, get all the work that they can, and then take you back into a different town and drop you off.
This is like a Pinocchio situation, right? With the
I don't know.
he has Pinocchio come and work at the circus, and then he kidnaps kids, turns them into donkeys. I mean, there's no turning them into donkeys, but like there's kidnapping going on.
That's what Pinocchio's about?
Yeah, it's pretty dark. Like where he ends up becoming a real boy, he ends up going back to like this circus or something, and yeah, the guy at the circus kidnaps children and then turns them like magically into little donkeys.
No
It's
way.
dark shit. Yeah.
I thought Pinocchio was just about him trying to get his nose back down after it grew. Holy shit, that's crazy. But yeah, he shows up. Luckily, I don't know if it was his father's doing, saying, hey, you probably need to be armed here because it's a little bit wild, or maybe Aunt Maddie's like, you should probably carry a pistol out there.
Yeah, you're strapped, right?
Yep. So he ends up walking into this business. This is almost kind of crazy because have you seen the new Willy Wonka?
I haven't seen it yet. With Timothy Chalamet.
Yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. But he kind of walks into one of these situations where he walks into this building, tells the guy what he's there for. The guy's like, yep, head on into the back. There's a bunch of other guys back there. You'll start working. And he kind of gets a bad feeling and turns around to leave. And when he goes to leave, the door's locked behind him. So he ends up having to pull out his pistol and point it at the dude for the guy to let him open the door. That didn't go great. But his next big stumble upon was huge because in Denver, he ran into a caramel maker that had a completely different plan as to how to make caramel. It was a lot chewier. It was a lot sweeter. It held its time on the shelves for a few weeks. And I think basically it was more of them using cream instead of just milk. So you have more fat in there. So it's going to be chewier. It's going to, just be a better product, basically. Yeah. And this wasn't patented, so Milt goes ahead and commits this recipe to memories. He's working in this caramel factory in Denver, heads all the way back to the East Coast, goes all the way back into Lancaster, says, Aunt Maddie, I know I screwed up the first time. I got this new recipe. This new recipe is going to change everything. I need to make this happen. And Aunt Maddie goes, okay. We're going to give you some more money and we're going to see what happens. He ends up moving to New York City with another loan from Maddie and his uncle.
I see it being like one of the Nick at Night shows about like the women moving to New York City, and it's Milt Hershey in New York City. It's like, you're gonna make it after all.
A lot like that, yeah. I'm sure. Midtown Manhattan, though. Don't know if it was that big of a deal back then, but Midtown Manhattan's a very big part of New York now. Right off of 6th Avenue, and his second shop actually doesn't go too bad. He opens it up in Midtown, like I said. The initial success brought his aunt and mother again just to show up to start helping him out and making sure that he had some free labor to try to do as well as possible. He also had this guy that was kind of like his money guy for his first shop. His name was Lemmy Lebkicker. I think that was just some nicknames.
That guy is definitely involved with the mob.
Sounds a little mobbish for sure. But Lebby, his mother, his aunt, they all show up, and then the problem shows up. His father shows up once again, and his father has this brand new idea that we need to make. I'm trying to think of who to compare
this father to.
The dad in Holes almost, except for he never succeeds.
Yeah, the one that's always got like a scheme. Maybe the dad in Shameless.
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids a little bit.
Wait, no. You fucking leave Rick Moranis out.
He shrunk his kids. And then made them bigger sometimes.
This is completely different. He had this with love. This is just, you know who this is? This is the dad from The Water Boy.
Yeah.
Show him back up when he's got an idea, when he wants something to fuck up.
I could go with that. Probably, hopefully a funny accent too. But Pops wants to run back this cough drop idea. Unfortunately, there's another large business that's already been established. I forgot the name of it that was in New York. So you're going up against just a completely different animal. There's already a market here for it, but that market's filled up by this one company. But regardless, Milton goes ahead and takes out another very big loan so they can get these new machines to start producing these cough drops, because this isn't just candy making that they can use the same machines for. You have to have some specialty stuff. And the cough drops are poor, don't really go well. And as soon as that happens, Henry goes ahead and sees that the winds are changing.
Well, hey, we tried.
Yep.
I'll see you in another 5 years when you're trying to get back up on your feet, and I can come in and fucking throw a wrench into it.
Swoop back in and make it happen. So Henry goes ahead and takes off, gets bought out again by his son in 1866. The shop closes, or 1886, it closes again.
This motherfucker leaves nothing but sadness in his wake.
No, but again, this shows that Hershey has this drive that he has to continue making things happen because he comes back to Lancaster again. He rents out a small space in a warehouse. He starts making caramels. He loads up a basket every day and walks through downtown and just sells caramels out of a basket. He was successful enough selling this Denver caramel that nobody else had really had because it was something that came from the West Coast that was just new. Mm-hmm. Ends up selling so much that he can get himself a push cart. So he does really well with the push cart, and eventually it's time to go back to Aunt Maddie, and Aunt Maddie's like, hey, you burned me twice. Your uncle's not going to allow me to give you any more money. I'm not giving you any more money. You need to go to the bank.
This is a food truck situation.
Yeah.
You start out and everything, and then once you end up getting big enough and established clientele, you go brick and mortar. He's just doing a food cart or a food truck.
Pretty similar, but having these loans that are following him around that he's defaulted on 2 other times.
Aunt Maddie says the juice is running.
Going into a bank to try to get another loan, and it's so funny to hear the amount of just inflation. He was looking for a $700 loan that in today's money is $23,000. That's how far our money has changed from $700 to $23,000.
I'd like a small business loan for $700, please.
Well, yeah, dude, what are you gonna do with that? You're not even gonna pay a month's rent in the store for $700. But he goes in. They go, no, not a chance. You fucked up. 2 other loans. We're not gonna make it happen. How did you get funding before? He's like, well, my Aunt Maddie. Like,
you borrowed from Aunt Maddie.
Yep. Aunt Maddie goes ahead and does just one more massive act of kindness, and she goes, I'm not going to give you the money, but I will put up my house as collateral. I'll co-sign on your loan for you for this $700.
If your fucking old man even comes sniffing around this,
yeah,
it'll be the last time.
I'm sure that was a contingency. The whole thing was make sure that your pops doesn't get anywhere near this. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, that's pretty big to put up one of her houses. Not all of her houses, but one of her houses.
I forgot about the multiple houses.
For this to happen. The big contingency on this loan is he has 90 days to pay back this $700. So you're going to have to make a ton of caramel because every one of these pieces are selling for like 1 to 3 cents.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It isn't like you have to sell 700 pieces at $1 each. These things are going for pennies.
Mm-hmm. So when you think about it that way, $700 is a hell of a lot. He's not getting close. We're getting close to this 90 days again. And he doesn't have the money to repay this loan. And
my fucking thumb, she's going to take my thumbs.
Yeah, Aunt Maddie, she's going to lose her house.
to make my caramels.
She's going to lose her house, and she showed me the knife she was going to kill me with if I lose this house. And then just, again, pure luck, pure coincidence. There's a British merchant that's traveling from Chicago to New York, ends up stopping in Lancaster, comes in, or runs into him, buys one of his caramels, is like, this is delicious. I've never had a caramel like this since I've been here. We don't have this shit back in Britain. I need more of this. Can you make me more of this? And Milt's like,
I can, but just to let you know, this is probably going to rip a lot of your people's teeth out.
We've heard about your dental over there. It's probably not going to be great.
We used to have the same dental plan.
Yeah. But this merchant says, okay, here's the deal. We're going to sign a contract. I need a large order that's going to have to be shipped all the way back to Great Britain. If you can go ahead and handle that for me, I will fulfill my part of this, and you will have a ton of money. So you only got a couple days left to do this. You have this massive order to fill. Any lender, if they see that they're just fulfilling a purchase order, is probably going to be more willing to give you a little bit extra time, and seeing that the money is going to be coming back.
Yeah.
He goes into the bank and he says, I need an extension on this loan. Oh, yeah, and I need another $1,000 to fill this order. The guy's like, no, man, we're not doing that. So he pulls out the purchase order. He shows him. He says, I got the money right here. I need this $1,000 extra for all the supplies and to hire all the people so I can fulfill these orders for this guy. Come on over to my shop. I'm going to show you everything. I'll lay you out my entire business plan just to show you how genuine that I am. And guy shows up, sees everything. He goes, okay, we'll do the loan.
I feel like this is a MacGruber situation. He's like, just tell me what you want me to fuck.
Well,
I'll do it. Just give me the money.
It was a situation that this guy believed so much in what Milton was doing that the loan application he knew was never going to go through for the $1,000 with Milton's name on it. So he actually put his own name on it to get him the money for it. So all of a sudden, he's flush with cash. He goes through and ends up getting this order fulfilled, gets it sent off, and we're coming down to the end of the extension. It was like a matter of days. He gets his check for 500 pounds. And again, just laughably funny, 500 pounds back in that day was the equivalent of $80,000 today, is what he ends up getting. First thing he does, as soon as he gets the check in the mail, doesn't even take his smock off or anything like that. He's just covered in candy and shit. Runs down to the bank, repays all of his loans, and now he's free and clear. He has a distribution network that he's figured out over in Great Britain to go make this money.
Which means it's not hard to pivot to distribute to other places when he needs to.
Well, and his caramel hits overseas, and it's massive. This British merchant, I'm sure, made a ton of money with it, too. But
he's also serving as kind of a guy that's like, hey, your contract with me, I need more because I'm going to distribute, charge a little bit more for it, and I can send this to France when we're not fighting each other or other areas of Europe.
There's certain off times that us and France aren't going blow to blow.
The 6 months every 30 years that we're not fighting.
Yeah, but as soon as this all happens, as soon as he's back in the black, the Lancaster Caramel Company takes off. And this business plan becomes different because instead of trying to make your nut selling one piece of caramel for 2 cents, if you put 10 of them in a bag and you try to sell that bag for 16 cents or 18 cents, instead of the 2 cents, you're getting rid of more product, but you still are making more money.
Yeah.
So instead of the penny candy where you're just pulling it out, because at this time you don't go in, there's not a bag of anything.
Yeah.
You go into a candy shop. The guy's standing back there. He's got these big-ass barrels with caramels and everything in them. You say, I want one of those, one of those, one of those. He grabs each one of them individually, throws them in a paper bag, and that's
kind of
how
like
you
the
get your
renaissance
shit.
of like what we're seeing is like chocolatiers popping up now, like candy shops that are like the fudge dipped specialty things. You go and you pick out your each individual candy. There was never at this point a fucking aisle in the store where just you could think of anything and everything was on it.
There weren't. You couldn't just go buy like a box of Reasons or anything like that. I don't know why I chose Reasons, but it's just such a different model that he could go after. And by 1894, Lancaster Caramel Company employed more than 1,300 workers and had annual sales of $1 million. $36 million today they were making just selling this caramel.
That's within like 2 years, right?
Would have been a little longer than that because I believe this was like 1886 that he did this.
So 1884, you said, because that's also what Hershey's has on
1894,
there.
yeah.
Oh, 1894. Okay, so, but to still go from that, even if that's a 5-10 year period, to go to 1,300 workers with $1 million, that's fucking, and off just like caramel.
Yeah, that's it. That's all you're making. That's making this whole engine go. And he ends up spending a little bit of time kind of around this time. It seems like the caramel market's good, but some of his numbers are dropping off overseas.
Probably some people starting to manufacture it over there, and guess what? I'm not going to pay to have it shipped over when I can just make it here. Same thing he did to the guy in Denver. He just figured out how to make it and then started making it closer to where his customer base would be.
Part of it, the larger part of it, though, is we have an influx of Swiss milk chocolate that's hitting the scene in England and in Great Britain and in Europe.
And it's new.
Because
it's hot. It's chocolatey.
Well, up till now, there was something called Baker's chocolate. You can still find Baker's chocolate. The company's name actually is Baker. It's just interesting the Bakers use it now. A lot of semi-sweet stuff. And this is kind of all that they had back then, was they hadn't really figured out how to make like a pure dark chocolate that tastes good or a milk chocolate, because it just wasn't a thing yet until the Swiss invented it.
So it was just bitter chocolate. Was what it was.
So you had chocolate out on the market, but as soon as companies like Nestle come on board and they start figuring out how to make milk chocolate, then the masses start eating it. Then the rich people start eating it, but it's still like it's a precious commodity.
So it's the difference of being like, I'm buying a product that before I can eat this, I have to then manufacture it in a way, like I have to turn this into a recipe and make it into a cake so it'll have that sweetness that's going to make it. Or I can just cut out all of that process and you can buy this chocolate right off the shelf and shove it immediately in your mouth.
Yeah. Part of it too, a lot of it was when they would use baker's chocolate for things, it would be like to make hot chocolate for like children or anything like that, where you're going to be adding sweet cream, you're going to be adding sugar just like you would to tea or anything like that. So you still you're kind of almost making your own milk chocolate just in a way. But Nestle ends up hitting big. Then we get those wonderful eggs that everybody loves every Easter when Cadbury comes along in England.
Makes sense that it's in Cadbury. Cadbury. Okay, yeah. I don't know why I never made that connection. Making chocolate eggs and shoving shit inside them, that just seems like a wholly American idea. So I guess I just made the assumption.
Yeah, if we're going to fill a hollow chocolate thing with caramel, it's probably going to be American. But Cadbury starts over in the UK. While he's over there, he ends up finding out that Cadbury's company has this revolutionary idea that they're going to put a factory out in the middle of these fields in the rolling hills of England, and then they're going to build a city around it. And all of those workers that live in that city are going to be working for that company. And we can change the lives of all these people by creating this beautiful utopian town for them to live in. The happier our workers are, the better our product is going to be, and we're going to attract more business that way. Milt hears that, and he's thinking, well, that's interesting. I wonder if there's anything that I could do with that overseas.
Is the town called Cadbury? Is there a town of Cadbury?
It's not Cadbury. I think it starts with an S. It's a different town. But this kind of plants a seed in his head, like, well, these people like chocolate over here. Cadbury is doing something completely different with chocolate. We probably need to figure something out in the United States. 1893, Chicago World's Fair. We have another World's Fair that he goes to for influence. He walks into the machine shop and he sees a fully functioning German chocolate assembly line. So
essentially from the liquid chocolate that they have in the vats coming down into molds, cooling, pressing, all of that stuff, and then coming out being wrapped and ready to go.
He's absolutely obsessed with it. This is a guy that's in the caramel business that has absolutely no use for chocolate making equipment because it's a completely different process. But he is so infatuated by it that he's like, I got to do this. We're doing good in caramel. Caramel's kind of a fad. It's falling off because he does see the numbers in England with milk chocolate over there. And he's like, oh shit, we probably need to change some stuff up.
This is completely an off topic. Well, it's still on topic. Isn't it weird though that Hershey's has like no candy that features caramel or under the Hershey's name?
We're getting there.
Okay. Because I imagine because nowadays that's a home run. You have that with Milky Way, you have that with Snickers, you have that with Caramello, Rolos. I mean, everything's chocolate and caramel. They go together. But Hershey's, based on what you're telling me, how it got its start and everything, you would think that they would have the market. That's what you would be synonymous with chocolate and caramel. Yeah,
but chocolate is where the market is going. And this Baker chocolate is not great. So he sees that there's a market over here, and eventually he ends up striking a deal with the German that has a chocolate production line over there. He's like, don't send it back to your country, box it up, send it to Lancaster. I'll buy everything off.
I'm going to save you guys a trip from having to ship this stuff all the way back overseas. You're only going to be shipping it partially. So a guy with a caramel factory and a caramel business just bought an entire chocolate manufacturing line. Excuse me. But in 1894, just like you were pointing to earlier, the Hershey Chocolate Company is founded. Once he knows that that's where his whole momentum goes, he's got to try to figure some stuff out. He starts focusing on this baker-style chocolate first because he has the idea of milk chocolate. But when I start talking about how it's made, it's very interesting, like the steps to make chocolate into milk chocolate and vice versa. Well, not vice versa, but just how it goes. So he's putting out this crude form of chocolate that's working just like baker chocolate is. He actually ends up sending a spy into another chocolate company where he sends him over to the baker company because he believes that they're working on milk chocolate too. So he pays one of his employees to go all the way to New York or wherever it is for this Baker Chocolate Company. Corporate espionage already at work,
to work there to see if he can maybe copy a milk chocolate recipe that they're working on to bring it back to the factory. Guy comes back, he's like, hey man, They're
worked
not
for me.
really great.
It worked for me once. I stole this recipe in Denver.
Yeah.
It seemed to have worked out, so I'm just going to do it again.
They're not doing anything with milk chocolate. You have no idea or nothing to worry about. And so he goes, okay, well, I got some time. Got to figure some stuff out. 1896, he builds a dairy processing plant right off of his house so they can start working on this milk chocolate. 1900 rolls around and he needs some capital because he has this idea to build this chocolate factory and a town attached to it. So the Lancaster Caramel Company goes up for sale and it's bought by this guy named Paul Beach. He paid $1 million for it, which, like we were talking about before, is like the equivalent of $36 million today. So he is officially out of the caramel business. He has the Hershey business, but he doesn't have any place to put it. 1898, he marries this sweet lady named Kitty, and
You see the mom from that '70s show.
every single time, Kitty Foreman is all I see. I hear the laugh in my head too. Kitty is kind of like his other half, and unfortunately, she's got a disease that makes her age a lot faster and things get worse. But it was love kind of at first sight.
She has like a reverse Benjamin Button. No, wait, that's just him aging backwards. Jack. That movie with Robin Williams. What did he have? He was like a kid and he looked like Robin Williams did when he was like 45. I can't remember what it was called.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Not
something.
progeria,
I
right?
think it's the giantism. It's like acromegalia, or is that the giantism?
I don't know.
Yeah, but she ends up like by the age of 37, she's using a cane, so her body's not great, and it'll play a little bit of a factor later. But he starts purchasing land in this place called Lebanon Valley because everywhere around Lancaster is too expensive. Lebanon Valley is still in Pennsylvania, and it was an area where it was just kind of like farmland that people weren't making a lot of money on, but it was a huge, vast amount of space. By the end of 1902, he'd purchased 1,200 acres of land, and he started this grand project of a chocolate factory that's surrounded by a city and this little utopia that he was planning on building. 1903 rolls around, land's already being surveyed to start all of these different buildings that he's going to build. He's going to end up building a railway that goes in there. They have a major shopping district in here. There's an ice skating rink. A lot of, to me, sort of like the town right by Chernobyl.
That's exactly
Pripyat?
right. Pripyat.
Yeah, kind of one of those style places.
Except
And,
if this one melts down, it's a completely different thing.
yeah, chocolate meltdown, nobody's sad about. Melted chocolate's still great. But he wanted to build kind of this special place to where everybody could be happy. There were other companies that had done this, but the other companies that had done it besides Cadbury, it was like bare bones town. Like it was just enough to keep these people surviving to be able to work.
Do you think this is where they got the idea for Chernobyl? They're like, see, American chocolate factory. They just built town around factory. We do the same thing with Chernobyl.
There was a train, like an engine builder or something like that did the same thing, and I think that one was a little bit worse. But Pripyat definitely seems like, because Pripyat had all the like fancy shit to it.
Yeah.
And they'll end up having a sports arena just like Hershey does, but he does not have the recipe yet. He cannot figure out milk chocolate.
He's doing this all in the anticipation that he's going to be manufacturing this milk chocolate that's going to revolutionize everything. He still hasn't figured out, and in his mind, he's like, by the time all of this gets finished, I'll have cracked the code on this.
Yeah, and milk chocolate was kind of a tricky thing because he did not have a recipe to go on.
I just see him a desk at night with like a lamp and just crumpled papers everywhere, and he's like, why? And you look and it's like a formula for something, like, I can't get it. And Kitty comes in and she's like, Mill, are you okay? He's like, get out of here.
I can't get this figured out. But how do you think milk chocolate gets made?
Okay, well, before you know it's milk chocolate,
Yeah.
you just are trying to turn baker's chocolate into a more palatable, readily able to be eaten form of it. That's like not like a dessert or something like that.
But the Swiss already have milk chocolate. That was where
Okay,
Milton tasted this to know what he needed to make.
Okay, I think you're going to send me in another direction, but there has to be milk added to the process.
Yeah.
Okay.
The big issue with milk chocolate, though, is all of the extra water that's in milk, because you need the cream and you need kind of like a solid base to be able to do it with.
Where it's kind of rendered.
Yeah.
Like
You need to get the water out of the process as soon as possible. So He has no idea how the Swiss do it. Turns out that the Swiss just use a form of powdered milk to get the milk fats and the milk solids in there to make it smooth and creamy and have that taste. He doesn't know that yet. So his first idea, we're going to have some heavy cream. I have this dairy processing plant right outside my house that we can use to make any sort of milk that we want. Start out with heavy cream. He couldn't quite get it right because as he was adding the sugar into the cream to then add with the chocolate base that he had, it was still too liquidy. So the next idea that he had was just to go to whole milk because it felt like it was going to somehow go better. Whole milk also fails immediately. So once that happens, he's like, I got to figure out some way to do this. I'm going to go skim milk, but we're going to boil down the skim milk as much as possible. If we can boil down the skim milk as much as possible and take as much of the liquid out of it with the sugar in it, we can figure out how to add it to the chocolate liqueur or whatever it is. Also another failure. Finally, he just has one guy that was working in the dairy come up to his residence and he's like, I need you to figure out how to do this. Guy turns it on low. He starts boiling the milk. He adds all the sugar that he needs to it. He covers it up and they let it go on low for a few hours and come back. Boom. We get sweetened condensed milk for the first time. Sweetened condensed milk, as you've seen in those little cans, is just milk that has been taken down with sugar to a level.
Is the other term for evaporated milk? Or is that for powdered milk?
Evaporated milk is, I think that's powdered milk.
When I think of evaporation, I think of water coming out.
Yeah.
The whole time you're describing that, I just see that as a montage with him in front of the whiteboard trying to do different formulas. And then it's like skim milk. And he crosses out. He's like, oh, it's not skim. It's not skim. And finally he cracks and he's like, oh.
He literally brought in like a chemist, a scientist to show him how to do this that couldn't figure out how to do it. And it was just one of the guys that knew how to.
Had worked with it for so long or just got fucking lucky.
So
They forgot about it for an extra hour. And when they came back, he's like, fuck!
Yeah. He has his form of dairy, of milk that he can put into milk chocolate to start making this milk chocolate. And once they get that figured out, it's just a race to start getting this factory done. March 1904, the recipe's down. Construction's still in full swing. His father died in February of that year, which...
No roadblocks now.
Yeah, it's tough. Your dad dies. You love him. He's always been the dreamer. And to be fair, you're embarking on this city building plan to kind of build your own area and build this factory and sort of realize all your father's dreams of making it big. And then he dies before you can see the completion. Like that, there's a bummer to it. But like you say, this is going to probably save him a lot of stumbling blocks from his dad trying to make some decisions for him. His old friend Lebby, the guy that was running his books before, comes back in and he is helping kind of with some of the construction of the city. The demand for housing just goes nuts when they realize that this factory is going to be there because he didn't get to take anybody from the caramel company unless they quit and followed him that way. When that happens, I mean, you're making baker's chocolate. You don't have a full staff to be able to do that.
There's not enough of a demand for you to need that type of workforce.
Yeah. So factory ends up getting finished in 1905. Net sales for that year were over $1 million. The three products that they focused on that kind of, I think, made the big difference was instead of trying to branch out and do a million different things, he had three core products. 1905, the original bar that we're enjoying during this episode. 1907, Hershey's Kisses. Pretty cool that was just the idea.
So I got a question on the Kisses, just thinking about it from a production standpoint, because usually things come about by accident and then all of a sudden it becomes a product. So obviously with having to do the original bars, it goes into a mold.
Yeah.
It's then cool to go ahead and keep that shape. I see equipment being back then not having an immediate shut off like it does now. So with the Kisses, I just imagine a conveyor belt going in as this goes in and pours chocolate into a mold. As the mold moves out of the way, there's still chocolate left and it drips down onto the conveyor belt. And when it hits, it forms itself into that little dollop up top. Next mold comes in, it pumps the chocolate, and they're getting these little this is probably not even close how it works, but I just see accidentally them being like, oh, there's these little pieces of chocolate that keep being produced in between these bars or as a byproduct of it. They're just eating them off the fucking conveyor belt, and then all of a sudden they're like, we're already making these things. Why don't we just manufacture these as well?
Yeah, I didn't look into how Kisses were made. My assumption is that it's probably plastic molds that are upside down
Yeah.
in the Kiss form, and then it runs under like a blanket, like a waterfall of chocolate. Then you
Yeah.
have somebody scrape the bottoms flat on them. They cool off. You pop them out of the molds that way. But yeah, I mean, a thick enough chocolate as it falls, if it's just dolloping down onto the assembly line and not into a mold, you already have basically like the rough shape for a Hershey's Kiss. It's just about getting it into a situation where everything can be consistent and you can make them all the same size.
Yeah.
But it was such a foolproof plan because his idea was, we're going to make the product. Once we know exactly how to make the product, we're going to start looking into how we make it, and we're going to start pulling out all of the unnecessary elements. If we can get this down to something that's as repeatable as possible on an assembly line where people are doing specialized jobs all the time for those areas, we can just run this bitch so quick and start just producing everything as fast as humanly possible. And that's really what they did, because after all this happens, it was...
They also started producing the Hershey with almonds in 1908, right? Okay.
That was the last one. And even before that, something interesting that comes about is he was sued by a Swiss milk chocolate manufacturer.
As most people are tended to be sued during these ideas, because the idea usually, we've kind of determined during these episodes, you don't have to be the one that necessarily fully comes up with the idea. You just have to figure out how to make the idea become popular.
Yep.
And be able to be readily, what's the word, replicated.
And when it came down to it, they didn't really have a case on the chocolate because the Swiss used
Powdered milk.
and
And he used condensed milk.
Yep. But they went on with their suit because the wrapping around the chocolate bar that Milton used was a crimson with gold lettering on it. And so in order to remedy that, we get the traditional brown wrapping with the silver writing and then the silver
I'm guessing that the
foil.
gold and the red was the same that the Swiss company had used. Okay.
Same that the Swiss company used, and basically where Milton first got the milk chocolate. He's like, I'm just going to rip this packaging off completely.
All right.
So, but that's where we get the iconic silver and brown, is because he ended up getting sued away from using their idea.
Before we go any further, do you mind if we take a bathroom break?
Sure.
All right, we'll be right back. All right, listen up, people. Nothing can derail a podcast faster than dry mouth.
It's real, and honestly, it's dangerous. Thankfully, our friends over at Flintts Mints have got us covered, and they will get you covered too.
Not only do their mints come in a staggering amount of delicious flavors, but each flavor provides a different level of salivary satisfaction.
What Chris is talking about is their F-strength effect. From the lowest level of 100 all the way up to 300, the higher you go, the wetter your mouth gets.
Oh, baby. Listen, I like to use these things while I'm working out. It's really kind of irritating when you have to keep reaching for the water every time you get a little bit of dry mouth, especially if you're on the bike or something. Flint's Mints has got me covered. I pop in one every time my mouth gets a little bit dry and I'm set for my workout. Also, sugar-free, and they're also good for your teeth.
Recently, we just went on a hike to the falls, and like the preparer that I am, I forgot a water bottle. Didn't forget the pen though. On the way to the falls, I realized that my mouth was just dry as could be. Luckily, in my pocket, I had this sweet tin of Flint's Mints, and after I popped one, gave it a couple minutes, my mouth is wetter than those falls.
Now, enough about us. Where can you get this? You got to go to flints.com. That's FLINTTS.com.
Use code historically high for 15% off through November 30th on any mints at Flint's.
Again, that's flints.com, Flint's with 2 T's. Use code historically high. Get yourself 15% off.
Cottonmouth kills. Flint saves.
Okay, so what's next for Milt?
Milton Kitty.
The city becomes a city. The town becomes a town. Like we were talking about, the demand for housing rises. One of the things about the city that we'll go into this first. Got to name a town, right? If you're going to have it, you got to name a town. He puts it out to the people. What do you guys want this town's name to be? We're unincorporated, so we're never going to have an election here for a mayor or anybody to run the town. I'm still running the town. Town's mine. That's what it is. I'm going to let you guys name it. They end up choosing Hershey Cocoa. Hershey, KO, KO.
Okay.
For cocoa, unfortunately, the post office is like, no, we're not doing that. That's a bad name. But they dropped cocoa and they end up choosing Hershey. So, gotta feel pretty good that you created this company in this town for these people. And then in turn, they reward you by deciding to name that town after you. Probably pretty cool.
That's a pretty baller move.
Yeah, and Milton had some interesting rules, being a Mennonite and kind of believing in decency and these sorts of things. He didn't allow a bar or a liquor store or anything like that to be built within the city. It was a dry city.
That's a...
Yeah, kind of a downer. But like I say, they did have other things. They had department stores. They had all sorts of kind of fun.
The department store just made up for the lack of booze in the city.
Yeah. At the same time, too, though, in 1905, 06, when the city's being built, they're building this so they have electricity, they have running water, they have sewer lines to these houses. And that's a pretty big deal because that wasn't something that everybody had back then. And you had a job that kind of provided that lifestyle for you to be able to move into a place like that to have them.
Yeah.
The actual, like, all of the water, sewer, and trash and everything were run by the Hershey company. So they hadn't subcontracted everything out. He had the construction were companies that he had purchased to go in there and make that happen or paid to. But as far as like the upkeep and everything around the town, it was all Hershey Chocolate Company that was picking up the trash.
I'm getting some Walt Disney Epcot, what he wanted that to be, the city of the future that would have been like kind of run. Whereas it's like and then I see it as a combination of like Pleasantville, where you see the milkman pulling up. It says Hershey's Milk Company on the side, and the trash guy, it just has all the trash trucks are just that dark brown with like silver striping on it.
And the most iconic part of Hershey, PA, all the street lights are Hershey's Kisses.
Oh, seriously?
Yep. So a nice little touch that he put in there.
I just looked it up. There's like 13 populations, like 13,000, 13,500.
Yeah,
So it's still just, it sounds like, because I was wondering, like, did this balloon up to 200,000 people? It still sounds very much just a town centered on this factory.
Well, that and then Hershey Park is it's like a fun place. It's an amusement park.
I had no idea.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, they have an amusement park, museums, all sorts of stuff that are just like Hershey-related stuff. So it's, I think, a pretty big travel destination.
I'm just seeing Willy Wonka's chocolate factories. They just dyed the river brown.
I think their factory, I think, did have a milk chocolate river in it. Not like a Willy Wonka.
Just something to keep it circulated.
Yeah, well, and to take it to different departments and rooms and things like that for it to be worked on. Knowing that Milt and Kitty couldn't have children because Kitty was in such rough shape, they decided to open something called the Hershey Industrial School for Boys. And this was for families that didn't have enough money to support their children, along with themselves. Orphan children were admitted into this Hershey's Industrial School. And what they focused on was basically an agricultural situation where they would teach them like how to run a dairy farm, any sort of mechanical tooling or anything like that. He was kind of like building up new future employees.
That's exactly where my mind went. So I'm trying to think of it through both sets of eyes, because this is something that's like, he doesn't have, it's not in a religious way, it's in a capitalist way of like conditioning, like a conditioning program, or like kind of generating a workforce, like you're saying. And if he's doing that because he's like, I'm going to give these kids that aren't going to have an opportunity, a vocation, or something that they can look forward to as far as like a life to contribute to, or, employment that they're going to have.
Yeah.
Or you can look at it in the way of saying, I'm a businessman and I'm now finding impressionable workforce that I could basically breed for these specific jobs.
I'm sure that there was a little of that too in there.
Okay.
But when I tell you this stuff, this blew me away. I hope it does the same to you. But this Hershey Industrial School was built in 1909. After Kitty ends up passing away in 1915, which will come a little later on down the road, this is just kind of an aside for the school. Hershey donated $90 million to the school trust, and then also deeded them 40% of the Hershey Company's common stock in the Hershey Trust Company to make sure that this place would always be funded.
90 million back then?
Yes. I think that was today.
Okay.
But 40% of Hershey stock, and we'll talk about these numbers towards the end. He basically made sure that this school would be self-funded as long as the Hershey company was going to be up and running.
So does this school? I'm assuming this school has probably branched out to other things, like, but at the same time, this is like, this just sounds like the Annapolis, how Annapolis is for the Navy.
Yep.
This sounds like if you went to go to the Hershey's Industrial School, you automatically get put into the Hershey's company in an officer's rank or whatever they would say. Like you're automatically in management.
You don't start out as like a grunt.
You're not an NCO. You're not a non-commissioned officer, whatever they say.
Yeah.
Like you're not able to only work yourself up so high. That's still fucking nuts.
Well, and when we talk about their endowment, I think it's going to blow your tits off because it's very tough. Just as a little spoiler, the endowment for the now Milton Hershey school is on par with the endowment for Harvard.
Is the industrial school like akin to a college though now?
It's K through 12.
And it just services, there's only one?
We'll talk about the
Fucking
numbers.
robots teaching at this school?
Dude, it's fucking fascinating. 1911, Hershey's annual revenues reached $5 million, $160 million in today's money. Milt started to crack down on the rules of his city. He was using something called the Hershey Press to spread his views in the town, hoping to keep the city pure. And when we talk about stuff like this, this is where the capitalism kicks in, because one of the things was he
Milt
always
just turned into Hitler, man.
short of that. He always
You
preached.
just tell me that Milt just basically is pulling in a bunch of orphans, teaching them up on how to work in this Hershey factory, but he does donate all this money for the betterment of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But now Milt is like Big Brother looking over this town. It's now the town from Footloose in Germany in the 1930s. Is Milt going to have a shift again to the other side?
Maybe.
Okay.
But one of his big pushes was that he believed that there was a war of labor upon capital. And those are two words that become synonymous with the fight for unions that will happen later on.
Pro-union or anti-union? His thoughts were anti-union.
Very
Okay.
anti-union. But his thoughts were very anti-union because the union was supposed to be for the betterment of the people that were working for that company, right? Mm-hmm. Milton had created a town and gave all of the best things that he possibly could to these people. And there may have been a little belief on his part that because he did that, there was no reason to form a union because he knew the best route for the people working in his company and living in his town.
But the whole point is because what he thinks may not be the reality of it, and that's what unions do, is they get the collective position of everybody and try to present that. Milt is under the assumption that because he created this town and this place where these workers live, that he now, because he created the jobs that they're relying on, that he has every idea of what their best interests are.
And unfortunately, some of his ideas that he put in the Hershey Press were he was against interracial marriages.
Did he have some type of weird Hershey logo where it was just an H, but it was kind of sideways in like a cross formation or like any other things pointing out? It was a dark brown flag with a circle with the two H's in the middle of it and banners on the street. He had a secret Hershey police. What would he call them? They were just called the Kisses, actually. So they didn't sound threatening or anything, but they would come over and they'd be like, the Kisses are here to ask you what you've been doing.
The two S's in the middle were the two capital S's.
Yeah.
Kisses. So yeah, he wasn't a real big fan of mixed race marriage. He wasn't a real big fan of foreigners and outsiders. And at any point in time, when we talk about
Can I
people,
say it's ironic that he didn't like chocolate?
he didn't like people getting their chocolate in his peanut butter. But, yeah, what's the one thing that we learned that everybody hates back then? Interrace, foreigners, and
The Jews?
the Jews.
Okay.
Not a big fan of the Jews. I don't know what Milton Hershey had done.
I'm only so confident providing that answer based on the fact that we've discussed this over the last 200 episodes.
Yeah.
That there's been a common occurrence throughout the world.
Hershey was part German, so maybe that was where it came from, too, is distrust of the Jews. But, again, it just pops up everywhere. Milton Hershey actually had himself a seat on the Titanic.
See, this story's taken a dark chocolate turn.
Milton Hershey had a business meeting that kept him off of the voyage of the Titanic.
Did we touch on that a
I
little
think
bit?
we might have talked about
Okay,
that
because I
during
know
that
we talked
episode.
about a couple people who were supposed to be there,
Yep.
prominence, like one of them was a banker or some shit.
One of them was Carnegie, wasn't it?
Carnegie, Chase was there,
Yes.
and maybe it might have been Carnegie. So a steel tycoon, it was something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So I imagine that Milton probably wiped his brow pretty well.
Which way? Did he have a seat on the original voyage? Because you could still have had a ticket on the return voyage back from New York over wherever it was going.
I think he was original voyage.
Oh, shit, okay.
So dodged himself a bullet there. If you haven't listened to that episode, it was forever ago. Titanic was a fun episode that we had done. And so this whole entire view that he's taken towards the city is, I want these people to do what I want. There was rumors that there was a group of guys that worked in the factory that would meet at one of the hotels downtown and get drunk. So he actually paid some spies to go see if he could break up that ring, and ended up finding out that there was a little bit of a bootlegging situation going on and they were getting drunk in the hotel.
Of course.
He didn't fire them. He punished them. Later on, he would kind of fire people at will. He was always the first guy to, if he was having a good day, he would try to fight for you. Like there was a story about, it was a guy on a job who had been fired off of a construction site, and the foreman had said that it was something that he had done, and Hershey had talked to the guy, done some more research, found out that the foreman was just angry and fired him for no reason. So Milton got him his job back, and then had the foreman fired that fired the guy.
He sounds like someone who feels that because of the things that he's offered people and they've accepted, and that he feels he's provided, that he's owed just almost a unquestioned obedience or allegiance.
Yeah.
And that by living in this town, you're thereby agreeing with his rules, whereas there shouldn't be any type of dissension or bringing in, like, you put the term pure in quotations. Is that like something he actually is said, or was like in a way said that that term just like catches my eye.
Well, purity in a sense of like Christian purity.
Yeah, I get you. Like the Mennonite views, because he still had that background and everything.
Yeah, we're not talking like blonde hair, blue eyes type purity.
Well, you said the thing about interracial marriage, so there seems to me there might have been like,
there could have been some of that in there too. But Kitty passes away eventually at the age of 42, which is so damn young, and we haven't even hit the 1920s yet. When we hit the 1920s, Henry Hershey pops up in Milton at certain points in times, and this is one of those times that Henry Hershey, his father,
you start to see the Henry Hershey in Milton. Okay,
so
I
much.
got you. Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, you said he pops up, and I was like,
Well, he needed a way to control the cost of supplies because things like sugar, the sugar market was fluctuating left and right. So he goes ahead and buys this large plot of land in Cuba because, of course, Milton Hershey would buy a plot of land in Cuba because that's something that just seems like it would ever make sense in a sentence. But he bought these sugar plantations that were down there. They were called centrales, which were plantations, and then the refineries where they would be refining the sugar. He kind of built almost like a little Hershey 2.0 down there.
well, he's wanting to control every aspect of the means of supply and production. He's like, I'm paying these people so much for this sugar, I just need to get my own sugar, then I'm not reliant on them. He already had, I think, the dairy thing probably covered.
Yeah, well, and where they were in the Lebanon Valley, there were plenty of dairies around that were just Hershey specific. So he purchases the land. He does a lot of the same stuff that he does in Hershey. He, gives them electricity. There's plumbing down there. He definitely makes the situation a lot better than it was for these.
But primarily for his own benefit, because it's going to increase production.
Well,
and maybe he also feels that once he does this, those people will owe him their allegiance or loyalty and all that good stuff.
You're catching on to Milton's plans.
Okay.
But the cost of getting all that shit running and all the time that it takes, he still needs sugar in the meantime. And he makes a folly that you would think he would never repeat again. But what he does is, as the price of sugar is raising, he goes ahead and he purchases sugar futures at 25 cents a pound to try to stable his cost of goods that he's going to be using to make. When you buy a commodity like sugar, you always know that the market is going to be very volatile, either up or down. At this point in time, it was raising up. He ends up purchasing these futures for 25 cents a pound of sugar. And not almost immediately, but pretty soon after, the ass falls out of the sugar market and drops down to 4 cents a pound. Now, when that happens, and you've committed to buying sugar futures to buying at 25 cents a pound in the future, when it drops down to 4, you still have to pay the 25 cents a pound premium.
Mm-hmm.
So you're paying 5 to 6 times
yeah.
as much money as everybody else is, all the other new chocolate makers and candy makers. Coca-Cola is a thing at this time. So this kind of blows the company up to a point where he had to go to this place called the National City Bank in New York to ask for a $30 million loan to cover all of the money that he wasted in these futures, and then continue to make the company run. So,
what do you mean you're asking for? Aren't you the guy with the weird town?
Yeah. You have your own town, and all of a sudden you fucked up sugar futures so bad that you have to go to a bank to try to loan you money to keep everybody solvent. And not only that, to keep this Hershey Industrial School running, because if the company goes under, all of the funding for that school is gone.
How are you this bad at sugar prediction? Isn't that your guys' thing?
Yeah.
Like sugar is necessary?
The sugar market rises and falls the entire time. You were dealing with the sugar market with the
Man,
caramel
you guys
company.
really should have started like your own sugar company.
Probably wouldn't have been a bad idea. So there's a new investment banker that kind of comes in that helps see the National City Bank side of things and make sure that the company's heading in the right direction. During this time, Hershey actually institutes profit sharing for all the workers down in Cuba as well. So for all of the money that they're making and all the money that the shareholders are being paid out, he's making sure that a share of that profit is going straight directly back to the workers.
This man is a very complex individual.
Yeah, it's huge. But again, keep in mind, this is something that he wanted them to have. So this was a choice that he had made for them.
Okay.
That bolsters a lot of support in Cuba. They build a railway for transport. And the whole place is called Central Hershey, Cuba.
Are the people in Hershey, PA, profit sharing too? Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it was him bringing everything basically there down to Cuba.
That would establish a lot of loyalty. Yeah, to make you feel very intrinsically tied to that company, like you have ownership or stake and never want to leave it.
Well, and a guy that has you on his mind first, any other decisions that he makes, you're just automatically going to assume that he has your best interest at heart too when he's making these decisions. He doesn't like that the
He doesn't like their sandwiches.
No, nobody hates a Cuban sandwich. They're incredible. Oh, he didn't like that the bank was now also invested in his company too, and he needed to get them out as soon as possible. He didn't like anybody looking over his shoulders because this was a company that he built.
He's very accustomed to having the say.
So he implements these new cost-cutting measures. He basically brings the whole company in front of him and gives this big impassioned speech about cutting costs, increasing efficiency. He wants to implement temporary wage restraint, so no raises or anything like that, in order to try to maximize the amount of money that they can pay back for the loan. He pushed the marketing department to just basically do as much as they ever have before to try to just make as much money to get this money paid off. Eventually they do it. The company becomes whole again, just in time for a labor crisis that happens in Cuba, because we have the first kind of communist uprisings happening down in Cuba, and you have these private American enterprises that are basically doing whatever they can down in this country that's supposed to be protecting its own interests first.
They're doing stuff down there where there are no rules. Technically down there now comes in this establishment, regardless of what it is. It has rules, and it's probably not going to allow you to continue playing by your own.
So we get a strike that happens down there. Milton uses all of the things that he's ever done for Cuba against them immediately. He's like, you guys make more than everybody else working in Cuba. I've built you houses. I've given you electricity. I've made your lives this much better, and you're going to strike for higher wages now. So when the strike kicks off, only about half of the people that they expected to show up for the strike show up. they realize that there's a weakness in this strike because they don't have the numbers that they thought they would before. They go back to the bargaining table, and Milton alone says, I'll tell you what, I'm not going to give you the number that you wanted. How about a 10% raise? And knowing that they don't have any more bodies out there to go on strike anymore, they're like, okay, we'll take it. Once that happens, everything runs really, really well down in Cuba as far as the sugar production goes. Central Hershey, Cuba ends up producing such a surplus that they were actually selling sugar to Coca-Cola. So Hershey was selling sugar to Coca-Cola. That was how just the markets worked back then. Just very cool how everything kind of comes together for those companies. But again, his major thing after seeing the strikes is like, well, I have to make sure that I protect the school at all costs. I have to make sure that if one of these industries falls, if Cuba falls off the map completely, it can't completely affect the rest of my businesses. Yeah. He breaks up these 3 companies to protect the school, his chocolate making endeavor, and then the sugar company down in Cuba. And when you do that, and you break these different companies up, you have the ability to sell out new stock for all these different companies while keeping the majority share yourself in each one of them, so you have the controlling interest, but you can bring in a bunch of more capital when you're selling these stocks.
Yeah.
So he goes back to the bank, and something that had just happened was the General Foods merger. So I'm blanking on the companies. Like Post, a lot of the sugar cereal companies and everything like that had...
Post, Kellogg's.
Yes.
Okay.
Had formed a conglomerate because if they all became one company, they could save a bunch of money on distribution because they don't all have to have their own separate... To get the product directly to the consumers, it's all just one company doing everything. Okay. So there's this brilliant idea that if we can get Hershey to sell... We have Heinz lined up. We have Campbell's Soup lined up. We have Palmolive lined up to join this big conglomeration. And if we can get all these guys under the same banner, then we can use the distribution all at the same time, and we can make a shitload of money by cutting down our costs of distribution. And at this point, Milton was intrigued. Milton said, okay, let's make this happen. And instead of getting this major conglomeration, the Depression goes ahead and squashes the deal because 1929, when the stock market falls, there's no way that you're ever going to be able to combine companies because nobody knows if they're ever going to make money again. So we were just an eyelash away from Hershey not being the independent company and getting this another just massive monopoly like General Foods is now, where Heinz, like I said, Campbell's Soup, companies that you look at now and you're like, these are pillar companies that help build this country. We're all going to end up being one just country or company mashed together.
That's what's crazy is when you see the breakdown of products and there's literally like 120 products, and when you break it down, all of a sudden it comes from 5 different companies. And the companies you're looking at, you're like, those ones own a car manufacturing. You're like, it makes no fucking sense. They own so many different things. But when you really break that down, you probably shouldn't do that because that does actually kind of like make shit scary. That like these people are all in charge of the distribution of all of these different types of products that people are wholly reliant upon. Because in this day and age, I know like homesteading is supposed to be like a big thing that's coming back, but 99.9% of people couldn't survive for fucking like a week without manufactured foods.
No, and homesteading's a really great thing. Unfortunately, the whole idea behind homesteading was that you would learn from the people before you. And when there's a massive gap of all of these old blacksmithing trades and all of these old farming trades and shit like that that start to go dormant and you start to lose them, it's just like a language that never gets spoken and becomes a dead language.
Yeah.
There's a lot of shit to homesteading that we've kind of let go by the wayside that'll just never happen again. So you get these dependents. But the other scary thing is when you talk about the question of inflation, which it's undoubtedly there, but there's no way of getting around that price fixing for different products is going on.
Yeah.
If companies are still making record profits, but we have record inflation at the same time, they're still making record profits, so they're inflating theirs to continue to make their money. When you realize that there's one company that has 15 different things that you have to buy at the store they're not just raising prices on one of them. They're
No.
raising prices on every product that they distribute.
Yeah, like if you're interested in doing that, pull up and put like food distribution companies or food manufacturing and just hold it out and go through your cupboards and been like, oh, like 50% of my shit is all from one place.
Yeah.
So when they raise the price on that, it's raising the price on, everything like you said.
We have a Great Depression. Excuse me. We have a situation where everybody's unemployed. There's nothing else that they can do. Every institution that we have is falling apart.
And when you really break it down, like this is a luxury item.
Oh yeah.
It's not flour, it's not wheat. You're not going to feed your family with it. So when you are dependent essentially on a luxury product and you run into a situation where no one has money for luxuries, that's going to fucking hit ya.
But somehow he continues on. Hershey kept the town and city running through the Depression by self-funding these construction projects. So just like the New Deal, just like we end up pulling our country out of the Great Depression, Milton uses this in his town to where if he does have to lay off employees from the chocolate factory, which he also cut their wages, forced overtime that wasn't going to be reimbursed on them, cut their hours, different things like that. But he kept people employed at the chocolate factory making chocolate as the price dropped. Also, the benefit of that, all the cost of goods that he has to use to make the chocolate also gets cheaper too. So you can almost run on a thinner margin at that point. But all of the people that he couldn't employ at the factory, he then employed on these construction projects to build a grand, luxurious hotel downtown.
Do you think Willy Wonka ever ran into these kinds of issues? Or do you think the Oompa Loompas were unionized and so it was never really a thing?
I don't know if there was any sort of unionization in Loompa Land before he got them. Like,
yeah.
And that was all they knew in this country. It wasn't like there were Oompa Loompas that were working on a train company or anything like that.
Okay, good point.
It was all they knew.
I do find it to be a little strange. Okay, so, and I know that like when you're talking about like the construction projects and everything, there were like mechanics at the plant and there were like tradesmen and stuff like that. I just see it in my head of being like, man, I just lost my job on the quality control assembly line. I was a chocolate taster. And thank God Mr. Hershey came in and put a tool belt on me and it's like, you're a framer now.
Yep.
And I went and started framing this hotel.
Now you're
Have
humping
you stayed in the
lumber.
hotel? Oh God, no! I would never stay in that hotel.
You're humping lumber up a ladder, and you're like, I
Yeah.
used to make things that were just delicious. But he did it. I mean, everybody else in the world, everybody else in the world was affected by the Great Depression, but through Hershey investing his own money to keep this whole entire town running, he pulled them through so much better than any other place did because he was able to keep his people busy and keep them working. Kind of in the rebound from the Great Depression, he runs into a problem with the school. And the problem with the school, funnily enough, is the Catholic Church. Which, Catholic Church, orphan boys school, we don't really know where that's leading, but it's not going to be great.
Is this still just a boys' school?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Everybody else doesn't come in till later. But he has a Catholic bishop that shows up and he goes, essentially, they have a conversation about how the Catholic boys that go to the industrial school.
I hear there's a boys' school here. I've heard word of a boys' school. Do you require tutelage, teachers, a priest maybe for your boys' school?
Can I volunteer? There are a lot of corners that I can maybe sneak around.
Alcoves maybe?
The bishop shows up. He goes, hey, I know you're running this school, and this is not word for word, but kind of the idea. You're running this school. Got a lot of Catholic kids that come here. Part of being a Catholic is your ass has to show up for Mass. You have to be there on Sundays to worship God because that's what we believe in is if we can get you through the door, we can talk you into a lifelong investment into our business that we're running here that we're calling a church. And Milton's like, nah.
I'm a Mennonite, bro.
Well, he's like, they get plenty of teaching here. We teach them general Christian courses for the betterment of society. And he's like, yeah, but no, we're Catholic. We do stuff different than general Christian teachings. They need to come to us. And he's like, I don't know what to tell you. There's people of all different religions that go to this school.
Did you see the name on the town when you drove in?
Yeah.
Would you like me to show you my driver's license?
Yeah, dude, this
Town's name is Hershey. I make the fucking rules.
isn't how it works around here. But
This ain't the Vatican, bitch.
No,
This is Hershey,
no.
PA.
Yep. I don't touch these kids here. You guys do. Hey, maybe if you want to take advantage of these children like you would do later on, create your own boys' school. Oh, you don't like how I run mine? But he tells them, he goes, I don't make special privileges for any other religion. Why would I do it for the Catholics? It's like, well, we're all powerful. And Hershey goes, okay, well, not going to happen. I'm not going to do it. Have fun. We'll see you later. The guy goes, you're going to regret it. There's postings in Catholic newspapers all around calling for a boycott because Milton Hershey is anti-Catholic because he doesn't let the boys at the school that he pays for to give them a better life. He doesn't compensate for the travel to go to a Catholic church.
Is this like a local kind of smear attack thing, or is this something because of the reach of the Catholic Church? And I'm assuming his products, with him making as much as he is, he's global at this point, I'm assuming in some degree. Are they doing this on a global scale?
Nationwide, baby.
Nationwide.
Yep. I mean, it's a Catholic-run newspaper. Anywhere that has any sort of that sort of slight to it can put something about how Hershey is anti-Catholic into their papers.
The Great Hershey Catholicism War.
Not
the schism.
The first one, not the last one.
Okay.
But it affected the bottom line enough to where Hershey's like, okay, I'll bust the kids to mass. Relax, let it be. Print it up in your papers. I'm pro-Catholic. I'm going to make sure that these kids get to mass. Just relax on that. And the Catholic Church won. 1937, all of a sudden, after they have thrived through this Great Depression, the profits and the sales return to normal, but all of those wages and all those cost-cutting measures are still implemented. So they're back to making as much money as they were before, but nothing really changes on the employee front. As unions were growing for Hershey, or in the U.S.
Do you think he has the mindset of he's like, I'm going to make myself whole first? Because if he's not
Probably.
making a lot and here's the thing, this is a very like up and down type guy. Like, and this is the whole point about historical figures is no one is just one or the other. And I'm not saying one begets the other because he does all of this good. How do you measure it against like his shitty beliefs and that kind of thing?
Yeah.
But again, this is typical. Like he is against this, but then he does this for this select group of people. But then you start to look at his motives of why maybe the good stuff is happening. And you're like, okay, well, he's paying for the town to go ahead and stay whole and trying to keep his workers in these positions. Is he doing that from a benevolent standpoint? Or is he like, I got to keep my workforce here because once this stuff starts cranking up in production again, I need to have these people here and I need to keep them loyal. So I'm going to dock them a little bit, and then I'll pay out of my pocket because this thing can't last forever. This Great Depression, we're going to have to come out of this at some point. And then when it came out of it, he's like, I'm going to get my money back first and fill my coffers first before I start letting them in on the increase in profits.
I protected you guys when you were most vulnerable. Let me be whole first, and then we'll maybe see if we can get back to it. But at the same time, think about having a job where you lived in a town that was owned by the company that then was putting spies out into public to make sure that you weren't drinking and you were following the rules of the company in your free time. That would suck.
Yeah, it like a secret police.
Yep. The
secret police.
The secret kisses were out there. Hey, that's weird. That's what they do at the Catholic school. Secret kisses, I think. Same ideas. And once this whole idea in the U.S. coming out of the Great Depression, 1935, the National Labor Relations Act is put to the country where it protects unions while its workers were trying to better their company or trying to better their ways against their companies. So now private companies can't go in and try to smash unions apart because the federal government said these people are supposed to be doing what they're doing. And Milton, who believed that these unions were irrelevant because he knew what his people needed, weren't too happy about it. After this all happens, 80% of the workers in the Hershey factory joined something called the United Chocolate Workers Union. So 80% of your workforce is saying, we don't like what you're doing to us.
And isn't part of some offshoot unions that might be smaller.
Yeah.
Are all under the banner of this one union.
Yeah. And as the story goes, just like anything else, when union workers aren't happy, there's a sit-in strike that happens inside the factory. And it ends up turning into a situation where this United Chocolate Workers Union gets this strike going, and all the Hershey executives go, this isn't going to work. And he goes, no, the people are behind us. And the factory organizers are saying, you're playing against us. You have to realize that there's dairy farmers out there. There are construction workers in the town. There are people at the school. And everybody else knows that the only way all of this functions is if you guys do your job. So even though you think you're standing up to us, everybody else around you and all these other different companies and people that make this place go, if they're not making money, they're going to hate you too.
Yeah.
Because a little bit of something is better than nothing. They said, okay, we'll see how it plays out. I'm sure we have the support of them. There was like a rally that night at the stadium where they were whipped into a frenzy, where all the townspeople were whipped into a frenzy. Everybody at the dairy was there. They were saying, if these guys sit in at this company, or sit in at the Hershey company, and we don't make chocolate, you guys don't make money. I can't buy your milk. We can't build anything new. And come the next day, the strike's still happening. There's an angry mob outside of the factory. They talk to the strike organizers, and they're like, okay, we give up. You were right. Let's go ahead and get out of here.
So they're threatening the strikers, the union. So Milt ends up turning the town, basically all of the like outside like support jobs, against the workers of the chocolate factory.
Yep.
So he's turning neighbors against neighbors and shit. Okay.
He says that he didn't really have a stake in it, and I don't know how far. I mean, he said that he didn't like violence. And when I say he didn't like violence, it's because after the strike was broken, when the union organizers and some of the strikers left through the front door, the townspeople beat the living shit out of them. And really ugly scene. They end up rushing the factory. They took a lot of the females out the back to try to protect them while they just went in there and broke the strike. Milt said there were 4 or 5 radicals, quote unquote, that had started the angry mob that led to this. But then at the same time, he also came out saying that he knew better than the union what his people needed. The federal government actually goes in and investigates this. Nothing ever really happens. But they do come out and they say your company has to hold a vote for representation of a union. Milton's never allowed a vote happen inside of his town except for naming the city. He's not a big fan of the democratic process.
I'm going back to that vote, and I'm wondering what the choices were. If it was like, it was just Hershey in front of everything, and that's why it had the cocoa on it. It was either just like Hershey Choco, Hershey Cocoa, and people are just like, well, I guess it's the cocoa one, and then they're like, well, guess what? Cocoa's not going to work, so it's Hershey.
Marvelous Miltons.
Yeah.
Just anything like that. So we have this vote that's going to take place, and of course he rigs the vote. He cut down the ballot to 2 choices. There was the Congress of Industrializations and the Independent Chocolate Workers of Hershey. One of those things, the Congress of Industrializations, to me sounds like a pretty legitimate organization. The Independent Chocolate Workers of Hershey sounds like something that may have been made up just a little bit.
If you track back to when it was actually created as an or a company and everything, it's very recent.
Yeah, and it turns out that the Independent Chocolate Workers of Hershey had the full support of the Hershey board and Milton Hershey himself. Him controlling the town, he also controlled the
ballot or wherever they were voting.
The ways to get the messages of the 2 unions out.
Gotcha. Okay.
So the airtime that these 2 unions would get, as far as hey,
the promotional availability.
Yeah, exactly. And it turns out, in a landslide, the Independent Chocolate Workers of Hershey won. What a win for Milt. The one company or the one union that he supported was the one that ended up winning. Well, of course, the government gets involved again and looks at it and they're like, no, dude, you fixed this whole entire thing. You rigged this whole entire thing. What are you doing? This is not going to stand. We're not going to let this happen. So, second vote that's held, free and clear of any influence, and the new union that wins out is called the Bakery and Confectionery Workers International Union, not backed by Milt, shockingly enough. They secured a new contract that had paid vacation, increased overtime pay, and then a formal complaint process. So all three of those things don't sound like crazy leaps, right?
No, what I'm saying is like it took the fact that they had none of this before.
Yeah.
And the fact that like he was trying to fix it to where he didn't have to provide them what basic expectations are for what we expect for jobs now.
Mm-hmm. And his whole entire time during the process, he just kept repeating to them, you guys get paid better than everybody else. Like, every other job in this country doesn't pay you as well that's going to be the same job as I pay you. I created this town for you. I gave you a place to live. Look at all the fun shit that you do during the day. I'm the reason that that's there.
And what he's missing is the point is that little game of math we all play in our heads about work and shit like that, about what is it worth to go try to find something else? What is it? And how, what are my inconveniences worth? And he is like, I'm paying you guys more than anything. Yeah, but like, what are we making as far as concessions by living and working here? Like, we're missing out on enjoyment because of the rules you have within your town that we're not able to do certain things. Those things to us might be worth that extra money. Yeah. That's what makes it worth not being able to do those things. So don't say that you're just like making everything perfect and we should all be happy with this. Because everyone here, and that's what Milt doesn't realize, is everyone is under different, circumstances.
Everybody's got different needs.
Yeah.
And so there's no real catch-all for them. But the fact that the union came in and just new contract, boom, paid vacation, increased overtime. We're actually going to give these people a voice to complain about unsafe working conditions in the plant if they're there.
Where it's not just like, it's like that joke. Here's the complaint box and it's the fucking trash can.
Yeah, same idea. When Milt got into his 80s, things started to go a little bit mentally. Some par for the course is things that he had done previously, but the first real big thing was he goes ahead and cocoa beans are doing the exact same thing that sugar had done. And so Milt goes ahead and he buys a bunch of futures in cocoa beans.
What are the odds I get it wrong twice, right?
Yeah, you can't get it wrong twice. Buys these futures for 12 cents. Almost immediately after that, they drop down to 8 cents. So he loses, 25% of the value, or no, 33% of the value. Mm-hmm. He's paying 33% above the market price for cocoa beans.
And he's buying a lot of cocoa beans.
Yeah. So he goes back to his old friend at the bank, and he's like, hey, man, you remember the sugar fiasco? He's like, yeah, why?
He looks at him, he's that old. He's like, do you remember the sugar fiasco? Because you might not, because you made this fucking decision that's very familiar to it.
Well,
or similar.
Milton's got a plan, though. Because after the sugar failure happens, he learned from that plan. He thinks, well, if I have to buy it at this price, if I get some more money and I artificially inflate the price by buying more cocoa beans to raise it back up to the level that I pay at and everybody else is paying at it, I can make my money back. I can save my money because
there's a term for what he's attempting, and I don't think it's in the realm of legality.
Artificial inflation's a thing. Okay. I mean, it's frowned upon. It's ethically not something that you should be doing. But at the same time, for the bank, they see this as a huge play because Hershey now is not the Hershey that it was before. Hershey's an empire now. So they can weather this storm a whole hell of a lot better. $17 million loan is handed to them. He starts buying these cocoa beans, and he actually has a little bit of success of inflating this price to himself just by purchasing up all these cocoa beans. That is until the suppliers realize that the only people that are buying this large amount of beans is one company. And so they're like, okay, well, we'll just sell everything to you. As soon as they sell everything off to Milt, he has all the cocoa beans, market drops off again. So now he just has these warehouses that he has to hold on to these overpriced cocoa beans for until he can either sell them off when the market comes back, because he's never going to use this many cocoa beans, but he finally ends up eventually coming out in an okay position, but it was only because they had enough backing to be able to sustain
They
through.
become big enough that they were deemed too big to fail. I guess, yeah.
Yeah. It sort of worked out for him as a wash, but then he starts getting into some more eccentric products. He created chocolate bars with dried vegetables in them to try to get a little bit of nutrients going.
I'm not gonna lie, that would work with my kid.
Yeah, maybe. I can't imagine that dried vegetables inside of chocolate would ever taste good.
This is off topic, but it's funny playing into this. I usually don't talk about this stuff, but it just reminded me. So he eats a plain hamburger.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there eating, and he looks at me and he goes, "If you're ever trying to get me to eat vegetables, you should hide them in this." As I'm eating a burger next to him that has lettuce and tomato and like onion on it, I'm like, yeah, that's how they usually come, dude.
We're not trying to sneak things to you. We've actually subtracted things from this.
There's a delivery process for this, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You might think that you're smart thinking that that's a great idea.
Well, then he explained it. He's like, no, you have to hide it in here. I was like, oh, I get it. Like within the...
Grind it up inside the meat.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a bad idea. So yeah, that doesn't go well. He tries to come up with this non-dairy ice cream made of peanut oil and seaweed, which again, that sounds fucking disgusting too. Maybe my favorite thing that's come out of this whole entire story because it's just so funny to me. He's got a bunch of excess cocoa butter. There's nothing that you can do with cocoa butter really. It doesn't, once it's stripped out of the chocolate making process, you just have a bunch of it. He's like, well, I want to try to use up everything. And I'm sure this is so much comes out of the depressionary mindset that he had because he lived through the depression and he tried to thrive. So you want to try to use everything that you can.
Yeah.
So he's like, I'm going to go ahead and make soap out of cocoa butter. Well, everybody thought that the cocoa butter smell of the soap was disgusting. I, for one, really like cocoa butter. I've heard that people don't like the smell of it.
Cocoa butter.
So the plans with the soap is it's not selling, is that they need to add a scent to it. And cheap-ass Milton goes to the board meeting that day that they're going to choose the new scents with a cold and realizes that he can't smell anything. So in his paranoid mind, he thinks that everybody else on the board is going to choose the most expensive scent that they can for the soap and make it way more expensive. He fakes his way through the smelling process and chooses the cheapest scent possible for the soap. Well, it turns out that the cheapest scent was the cheapest scent because it didn't last very long. So the additive, whatever they put in the soap, just completely sucked.
By the time it got to the consumer, it just smelled back like cocoa butter.
Back to cocoa butter. So they had to go through and purchase another scent to mix all this. Meanwhile, they have this stock of cocoa butter soap that's just building up.
And at this point, lotion wasn't really a thing, I guess. So they
No.
did they not make the connection that everybody that worked at the Hershey plant had the softest fucking hands?
I wonder if that's...
The hand jobs in Hershey must have been just
fantastic.
phenomenal.
Just like a velvet
Have
rainbow.
you ever had a Hershey PA hand job?
It's got to be
nothing like it.
Yeah, nothing like it at all. Milt ends up talking to his friend that owns the Waldorf Astoria in New York and all of those hotels, and they're like, hey, provide these to your guests. We'll see how it goes. The hotel got so many complaints about the hand soap that they cut off their contract with Hershey because they didn't want to be anywhere associated with this soap.
He was ahead of his time, I guess.
Yeah, and this is where things turn violent once again because they have a hockey team in Hershey, PA that plays at the arena. Milton's like, let's have a giveaway night. Let's go ahead and give all of these fans bars of soap as they enter the building. And the people that are running that arena are like, no, that's the dumbest idea that you've ever had.
You know how quickly that soap's going to end up on the ice?
Yeah.
Have you attended a fucking hockey game?
These people are going to go nuts. All you're doing is giving them projectiles in which to show their displeasure with. And they're like, why don't we do it this way? When they're leaving, we'll have people by the doors and we'll just hand them the bars of soap as they're leaving. And Milton's like, no.
What kind of message does that send? Also, like, hey, you stink, here's some bar.
My town, my hockey team, my rules. Hand it out at the beginning. First hockey game back that this happens, everybody gets their bar of Hershey soap that they already don't like the smell of. As soon as the ref makes his first bad call, 3,000 bars of Hershey soap are then hurled down at the referee onto the ice. Just a real bad look. Not great at all for Hershey. Luckily,
A severe concussion.
yeah, he's still making money at this point because World War II rolls around and the government goes to them to create D-rations, which were essentially a product of chocolate that had the nutrients for a day in it, but they had to make it taste bad enough that it was like the last resort thing that they were going to want to eat. And they made a ton of money off of this. Them and Mars, actually, one of the executives, his last name starts with an M, got together with the Mars Chocolate Company. They created M&Ms so they could put them in MREs because that chocolate or that candy coating protected the chocolate enough so it wouldn't melt in the rations.
That's what I was going to ask you. If that's the origination of the M&Ms, it had to have the thin candy shell that could withstand essentially being packaged and also probably protected stuff from getting mushy because of it, and also because of the heat, so it wouldn't completely just melt.
Just a brilliant stroke of genius to come up with something like that. And again, this is an innovation that comes out of war.
Yeah.
M&Ms are around because of war. That's just how it all works.
Do you think it's really, if you turn the two M&Ms and instead of M&M, it's WW, like
World
WW2?
War. I like that.
Ooh.
It's not a bad conspiracy.
I'm on to you, Mars.
That's a fun conspiracy, actually. They ended up making $80 million in sales of these D-rations just by the end of the war. So $1.4 billion they made off of this contract.
Think of this too, is like you've been over there, you had M&Ms. How many of those M&Ms found their way into people's hands, like, meeting civilians, all that kind of stuff, to where
Goodwill
all
missions.
of a sudden now you have a worldwide market for this kind of stuff. And the troops that come home have this fondness for these comfort things that it was the only taste of home that they had while they were there. So they have a positive view of, like, unless these guys are like, is this the fucking company that made the D-rations?
These were awful. But yeah, I mean, that's a worldwide marketing campaign. If you're in a pinch in World War II and you're in a town that's not so friendly and you only have M&Ms and chocolate to trade for your freedom, for a passageway to get out of a situation, that taste is going to linger. Hershey's final act would be spent looking towards making sure that the industrial school was going to be around for forever. He stepped down from the Hershey board in 1944. He ends up dying of pneumonia October 13th, 1945, so about a month after his birthday, in a Hershey hospital. The school would be renamed the Milton Hershey School in 1953. Its endowment today sits at $21 billion, which equates out to $90,000 a year spent on the 2,100 students. So $90,000 each of the 2,100 students that go through the K through 12 program there.
I don't even know, like, what are you spending the money on?
Everybody probably has, like, state-of-the-art laptops.
As a butler?
Yeah, and $90,000 a year is also, it's a boarding school, basically. So it's their living expenses. They're not living in a shitty dorm, though.
Can you imagine, you walk in there and the curriculum is just like marketing, manufacturing, engineering, sales, math, just like anything they're going to need to be just like a fucking corporate tool.
And I mean, it's $90,000 a year to spend on a kid. That's exactly what Milton wanted to happen. He wanted that to be able to stick around and to be able to thrive for those kids. 1968, we get our first non-white students that start being able to attend the Milton Hershey School. 1977, the first female student is admitted.
Okay, so 1963. So what happened if, like, you were working there before 1963, you were living in the town, you had children, but you were black? And you were working at the Hershey factory and all that kind of stuff.
Technically, the school still was for orphans or low-wage people. Okay. So your children were going to a different school. This was like a special school that was set aside for underprivileged kids.
Do you think there were kids trying to be orphans?
Oh, I'd imagine.
Because they thought that they could try to get themselves into the Hershey school. Like, kids are coming up with elaborate plans to try to, like, burn their parents in their houses and then be like, do I get to go to the Hershey school now?
Yeah, my parents died in the fire near his houses. Is there anywhere that I can go around here to live? Maybe a school of some sort, an industrial type school. But Hershey's over the years has gone through so many different kind of transformations, and the shit that they've bought, something that I held off on because while being a personal favorite of mine, it definitely could be an episode, but Reese's. H.B. Reese started out working for Milton Hershey at the Hershey plant before he branched off to create Reese's Peanut Butter Cups that would then eventually be purchased again by Reese's for like $16 million.
By Hershey's, you mean?
Or yeah, by Hershey for $16 million.
Do you think he came to Milton? He's like, I got an idea, boss. He's like, this thing's going to be huge. We're going to take some peanut butter and put it in between the chocolate, and we'll just do it in little cups. He's like, get the fuck out of here and get back to work. And so he just worked on it in his own free time. He's like, I'm going to show this son of a bitch.
It's going to be a fun episode when we go over that part of it. And that one might be something that's a little bit shorter because it's more of a simple story. But to know that the guy that created the most famous kind of like chocolate confection out there now, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, I'm pretty sure the number one.
They got to be.
Yeah, it has to be.
A frozen Reese's.
One of the best things ever done.
Frozen thin Reese's. Give me the thin ones. Freeze them. Just fucking gnaw on that thing.
But they own so many different candy companies now just because of the fact that Milton had this vision. Hershey's in 2024's market cap is $39 billion. That's such a large company that came out of 2 failures. He finally gets it right on his third time.
No, didn't get it right on his third time. He had to move back and was still doing stuff.
Well,
kind of like
his third time with the Lancaster Caramel Company that he ends up selling to then start a chocolate empire.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he wasn't ever comfortable just living in that caramel lane. He has to continue on pushing towards what he wanted to do. And the guy has a goddamn town. Yeah. It's Hershey, PA is still, like you said, up and running. It's still going on. Mm-hmm. And part of it was just putting out a good, consistent product, but the guy, for all of his business failings, he was a terrible predictor of where the market was going to go for shit like cocoa beans and for sugar.
I wonder after he died if they were allowed to dance in the town.
It has changed. I don't know if it has like a formal governor or anything like that. I'm sure they would have, or a mayor. They had to have gone about that. They've sold off. Hershey doesn't still run like the water, sewer, and trash. They've contracted those off
Public
to other
Works
things. I'm sure that there's bars in Hershey now, like places where people can get drunk.
Yeah.
So as this city has changed, I think there's been a desire to hold on to the Hershey name and kind of the Hershey atmosphere, so to speak, in the town. But this guy was absolutely incredible to me, just his drive and his willing to go. And part of me has an issue with him, and this is kind of more of a broader, it's not really an anti-capitalist thing, but philanthropy is something that everybody kind of looks to as like, you can make a ton of money if you die with no money because you gave it all away. It's awesome. Mm-hmm. And philanthropy is great. But is there an argument that philanthropy only has to happen because you weren't giving out more of your wealth during the time that you were accruing it to the people that helped you make it?
Like, is it like absolution? So basically, does the philanthropy at the end, is it like a confession? Like, you go to confession, you're absolved of all your sins. If you just hope at that point when you're at the end of it, you've saved up enough money. That's why you haven't spent any of it, because you're hoping that it covers the fucking bill that you've had for, sullying your name, basically. Well, I think there's a lot of that. I think there's a feeling like, well, if at the end I do this, that should absolve me, and I can point back and say, look how good all this money is going to do.
And there was an interesting... he was a guy, I think he worked for Harvard or something like that. But he made an interesting point just with a comparison to Walmart, where the Wall family, or the Walton family, not the Wall family, the Walton family built like this massive museum in Benton, Arkansas that cost like hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's what the kids did. And they're like, well, now Benton, Arkansas has this resource of this just massive museum down there. Did that money do more good eventually ending up in the hands of people that created this massive museum than it would have been had you been able to pay the people that work at Walmart an extra $1 an hour?
You're like, how many of those people are going to go down and see this? And what are they going to get out of this
Exactly.
They get nothing out of it. Yeah.
So for all of his great things, he did have his shortcomings, but that's just kind of capitalism. I mean...
that's people.
Yeah. It's... just how these things kind of go. So I can't really hold that against him. He seemed to have a little bit of a temper, but again, he did do a lot of pretty incredible things for not only the chocolate and confection industry, but to be able to float an entire town through a depression is pretty big.
He's a little bit like I'm not going to say he's chocolate Hitler, but maybe chocolate Mussolini.
Certainly not Willy Wonka. I don't
No.
think Wonka would have done a whole lot of the stuff that he did. But again, Wonka was working with Oompa Loompas instead of people.
That's true. And he allowed children to almost be murdered within his factory on several occasions. All right, man. You got anything else?
No, I think we got Hershey pretty good.
You got Hershey pretty good.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining us on this one. We'll catch you later.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit him with it.
Our Instagram is Historically High Pod, Historically High POD, and we are on Twitter at Historically High. That's Historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.